Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character?
Hi besties, I am Bashan Lashari with Corevanta. Today we should discuss about the
Blake Lively humiliated after Justin Baldoni exposes her money scheme. The Hollywood world has always been full of glitter, glamour, and gossip, but every so often a scandal bursts through the velvet curtains of secrecy with such intensity that it shakes the entire industry to its core, and that is exactly what is happening right now as Blake Lively, once hailed as Hollywood's golden sweetheart, finds herself drowning in accusations, contradictions, and a lawsuit that has rapidly transformed into one of the most controversial stories of the decade, one that doesn't just question her integrity as an actress, but exposes an alleged scheme of financial manipulation so audacious that even seasoned insiders are left stunned. And at the center of this storm is none other than Justin Baldoni, the actor-turned-director who once seemed to be Blake's collaborator, but who is now her fiercest critic and perhaps the single biggest obstacle to her reputation's survival. Because the way this story unfolds reads less like a simple behind-the-scenes dispute and more like a meticulously planned chess match where each move reveals deeper layers of ambition, betrayal, and the intoxicating pursuit of control and cash. To understand why fans and industry figures alike are so shocked, we have to rewind to the set where this all began, when Blake Lively was cast not only as the leading lady but also projected in the press as the emotional anchor of Baldoni's project, and yet, whispers from inside the production suggest that the lines between performance and power began to blur almost instantly, because while on paper, she was just the star, in practice she allegedly began assuming roles that were never hers, slipping into positions of authority that directly challenged the structure of the production, whether it was giving commands to crew members, brushing off the trained intimacy coordinator, or dictating how scenes of physical closeness should unfold, all under the guise of making the story more authentic. To some, this might have looked like confidence, perhaps even leadership, but to others on set it was a red flag, a breach of trust, and most dangerously, the planting of seeds that would eventually bloom into a full-scale legal and PR disaster, because Baldoni, observing all of this, would later claim that Blake wasn't just overstepping, she was creating a narrative that could be flipped and weaponized once the cameras stopped rolling. Reports describe her micromanaging the lighting to flatter her image, choreographing the placement of bodies in intimate scenes, and overriding professional guidance, almost as though she were directing without ever being given that title. And while this might have boosted her sense of control in the moment, it had the unintended effect of giving Baldoni and his defenders ammunition later, because when Blake eventually turned around and filed a lawsuit alleging misconduct, those very crew members remembered her as the one calling the shots, not the victim of them. This is where the contradictions start to snowball, and why Hollywood is buzzing with disbelief. How could someone who allegedly controlled the choreography, the closeness, the angles, suddenly pivot to claiming she had no agency, that she had been blindsided and pushed beyond her boundaries? That contradiction is the beating heart of this scandal, because in Hollywood perception is everything. And once perception fractures, reputation collapses. The lawsuit Blake filed was not vague, it was full of detail. Specific accusations against Baldoni, alleging that he improvised physical contact, that he initiated unscripted kisses, that he pushed for moments not written in the script. To the untrained eye, to the casual observer reading only those legal documents, this looked like a classic case of a powerful director exploiting an actress. Fans were quick to defend her online, praising her bravery, but insiders could not reconcile her claims with what they themselves had witnessed. Blake dictating intimacy, Blake overriding the coordinator, Blake insisting on realism, Blake pushing for additional rehearsals. And that dissonance is where the story starts to morph from a dispute into a controversy of monumental proportions, because if her claims don't align with the memories of the crew, then the entire foundation of her case begins to look unstable, even opportunistic. Add to that the whispers that her legal team wasn't just seeking accountability or policy reform, but rather astronomical financial compensation. Figures so high they rivaled the budget of entire independent films. And suddenly the story wasn't just about boundaries, it was about money, power, and perhaps manipulation. Baldoni's camp seized on this immediately,
framing Blake's lawsuit not as a cry for justice but as a calculated cash grab, a money scheme cloaked in the language of victimhood. And once that framing took root in the media, it spread like wildfire, because scandal loves a villain. And in this case the narrative was turning Blake from sweetheart to schemer. Tabloids speculated endlessly about the size of her financial demands, with some suggesting her settlement requests exceeded tens of millions, far beyond what the production itself had cost. And whether those exact numbers were true or not hardly mattered, because perception is more powerful than fact in Hollywood, and perception had already shifted. Suddenly people weren't asking was Blake wronged? They were asking was Blake plotting? And that single shift in framing changed everything. Her credibility, once untouchable, was now being dissected under a microscope, and fans who had adored her for years began to fracture into camps, some still fiercely loyal, others feeling betrayed, questioning how someone so admired could allegedly twist a narrative for financial gain. Social media turned into a battleground, with threads comparing footage, highlighting contradictions, and arguing over who was telling the truth. And in the midst of this chaos, Baldoni emerged with a reputation for transparency, insisting that what had been framed as misconduct was nothing more than Blake rewriting history to benefit herself. The irony of it all is that Blake's need for control on set, her desire to choreograph, to dictate, may have been the very thing that set the stage for her public undoing, because once those details leaked, they painted her less as a victim and more as a mastermind. And in the court of public opinion that is often more damning than anything proven in a courtroom. Legal experts, too, weighed in, pointing out that the subpoena threats aimed at journalists covering the case looked less like a strategy for justice and more like intimidation, an attempt to silence the press and prevent damaging narratives from spreading. But if that was the goal, it backfired spectacularly, because the press doubled down, emboldened by First Amendment protections and fueled by the drama of a Hollywood sweetheart allegedly morphing into a financial predator. That's when the humiliation began to crystallize. Headlines no longer read Blake fights for justice. They read Blake exposed, Blake humiliated, Blake's scheme revealed. The story had crossed a line it could not retreat from, and every move from her camp only seemed to dig the hole deeper. What began as a lawsuit to protect her image had become the very mechanism destroying it. The whispers inside Hollywood now revolve around one haunting question. Was this ever about boundaries at all, or was it always about money? Because if the latter is true, then Blake Lively, once untouchable, has orchestrated one of the most self-destructive scandals in modern Hollywood, and Justin Baldoni, whether by design or circumstance, has become the unlikely truth-teller in a war that has exposed just how fragile the balance of power really is when fame, money, and ambition collide. And so, as this saga continues to unravel, what we are left with is a cautionary tale for every star who believes their shine makes them untouchable. A reminder that in Hollywood, secrets never stay hidden. Money always leaves a trail, and the higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. Where image is currency and reputation is power, scandals often emerge like storms that sweep across red carpets and studio boardrooms, tearing through carefully constructed facades of glamour and control. And few sagas have rocked the entertainment world as forcefully as the unfolding spectacle involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. A narrative drenched in betrayal, legal maneuvering, public humiliation, and the raw exposure of what appears to be a calculated money scheme that shattered the illusion of perfection surrounding one of Hollywood's most marketable stars. For while Blake Lively once embodied the vision of elegance, relatability, and family-friendly sophistication that brands and audiences alike adored, the carefully painted portrait has begun to crack under the relentless weight of leaked evidence, courtroom clashes, and Baldoni's shocking decision to pull the curtain back on the behind-the-scenes reality, turning what should have been a discreet dispute into one of the most talked-about celebrity showdowns in years. And as the layers peeled away, what the public saw was not the golden goddess of fashion magazines, not the relatable mother of four who built her empire with cheeky Instagram posts, but a woman portrayed as manipulative, ruthless, and willing to bend not only relationships but even contracts, reputations, and potentially laws in her unrelenting pursuit of control and financial gain. With Baldoni, her one-time collaborator and ally, transformed into an unlikely whistleblower who refused to let Hollywood's usual culture of silence bury the truth, thereby igniting a firestorm that has engulfed fans, media, legal teams, and power players in an endless tug-of-war over image, money, and moral ground. And to truly understand the gravity of Blake Lively's humiliation, one must trace the scandal back to its genesis, when whispers began circulating that her financial dealings on a high-profile film project with Baldoni were not entirely above board, whispers that might have been dismissed as idle gossip had they not been followed by a cascade of tangible evidence suggesting that Lively and her team had engaged in manipulative tactics to inflate her financial stake, allegedly attempting to rewrite the narrative around compensation, back-end profits, and creative control in ways that contradicted both contracts and industry standards, a strategy which initially seemed clever, but quickly began to unravel as Baldoni's side compiled receipts, communications, and testimonies that told a darker story, one where Blake's carefully managed victimhood in the press, her suggestion that she was being sidelined, underpaid, and mistreated, was revealed as part of a grander scheme to reposition herself as both wronged and deserving of more money and power than she had originally negotiated. And when the case found itself creeping into legal arenas, with judges compelled to rule on disputes that most actors pray will never leave private arbitration, Lively suffered her first public humiliation, a judge categorically rejecting her claims that the industry had conspired against her and instead scolding her side for moving the goalposts mid-game. A damning phrase that became tabloid shorthand for her downfall, because once the notion of goalpost shifting entered the conversation, it stuck like glue, with entertainment journalists, lawyers, and social media commentators seizing upon the metaphor to highlight what appeared to be a pattern of opportunism. And while many celebrities in similar situations would have retreated, licking their wounds and negotiating quietly behind closed doors, Blake seemed determined to double down, projecting strength while behind the scenes her team scrambled to suppress the growing pile of evidence Baldoni had at his disposal. But Baldoni, perhaps motivated by a combination of self-preservation and a refusal to be cast as the villain in Blake's morality play, did the unthinkable in Hollywood. He spoke out not with vague allusions or cryptic posts but with hard documentation, presenting communications, footage, and detailed notes that painted a devastating picture of Blake, not as a wronged star, but as an orchestrator of control games on set, allegedly micromanaging scenes, manipulating colleagues, and demanding alterations not to improve the art but to solidify her dominance. And when Baldoni's camp revealed that they had preserved camera logs, production diaries, and corroborating testimony from crew members, the narrative shifted irreversibly, no longer hinging on he said she said, but on a mountain of tangible proof that forced even the most sympathetic observers to admit that something was deeply wrong. And suddenly Blake Lively's once golden reputation began to wither under scrutiny, her Instagram-friendly persona colliding with the harsh reality of accusations that she had manipulated financial agreements, undermined colleagues, and spun false narratives to gain leverage, leaving her PR team scrambling to spin headlines while her legal advisors, names like Shapiro and Bach, attempted procedural maneuvers to block evidence, challenge subpoenas, and delay depositions, though each tactic seemed only to reinforce the perception that she was hiding something. And as gossip sites devoured every filing, fans watched the idol they had once worshipped begin to collapse under the pressure, with the humiliation heightened by the fact that Baldoni's revelations were not delivered in anger or theatrics but with the calm, precise language of someone simply setting the record straight, a calmness that only underscored Blake's panic as her counter-narratives failed to take root. And the humiliation intensified when court records confirmed that several of her claims had been categorically rejected by the judge, meaning that she had not merely lost on technicalities, but had presented arguments so flimsy that they collapsed under the weight of scrutiny. And the image of Blake Lively, once a powerful starlet capable of commanding multi-million-dollar deals and setting social media trends, now being framed in headlines as someone exposed, humiliated, and caught in a scheme, was a fall from grace so dramatic it bordered on Shakespearean. And like all great scandals, it was not just the facts but the theater of it all that captivated audiences. The way Baldoni's evidence releases seemed almost cinematic, the way Lively's once unshakable confidence seemed to crumble into desperation, the way every courtroom exchange, every leaked email, every frantic PR statement turned into fodder for TikTok dissections and YouTube exposés, creating a media frenzy where amateur sleuths, legal analysts, and gossip fans all weighed in, magnifying her shame with every passing day. And the deeper analysts dug, the more they uncovered a pattern, not just in this dispute but across her career, of subtle manipulations and power plays that had previously been dismissed as quirks of ambition but now look suspiciously like a consistent strategy of image curation and financial maneuvering, raising the haunting question. Had Blake Lively built her entire empire on a series of controlled illusions, smoke and mirrors designed to make her look indispensable, while quietly ensuring that the money and credit flowed disproportionately in her direction? And if so, how many people in Hollywood had turned a blind eye to preserve the peace until Baldoni decided enough was enough, because his role in this saga cannot be overstated? For Justin Baldoni, once cast by the media as a mild-mannered heartthrob and thoughtful creative, suddenly emerged as the unlikely crusader who punctured the Hollywood silence, choosing truth over career convenience, knowing full well that by exposing Blake he risked being labeled difficult, risking future collaborations. Yet his willingness to endure that fallout only amplified his credibility, and each piece of evidence he unveiled didn't just tarnish Blake, but humiliated her in ways that words alone could not, because humiliation in Hollywood is not about being wrong but about being revealed. And once the illusion breaks, once the audience sees the strings behind the puppet show, there is no unseeing it. And as the story metastasized, what had begun as a contractual dispute spiraled into a full-blown cultural commentary on the nature of celebrity, power, and greed, with legal analysts drawing comparisons to past scandals where stars had tried to play both victim and mastermind, while media outlets framed it as a cautionary tale about the perils of overplaying one's hand in an industry where receipts always resurface. And through it all, Blake's silence, or worse, her scattered attempts at half-hearted denials, only deepen the humiliation, because in the court of public opinion silence reads as guilt, and denials without evidence read as weakness. And when pitted against Baldoni's meticulous records, her vague defenses came across as hollow. And so here we are, in the aftermath of a spectacle that has redefined Blake Lively's image forever. A saga where her humiliation is not merely the product of Baldoni's revelations, but the inevitable result of a strategy built on manipulation colliding with a collaborator unwilling to play along, leaving her empire shaken, her reputation tarnished, and her future uncertain, as fans and critics alike ask themselves not whether Blake Lively will recover, but whether the Hollywood machine that once protected her will ever allow her the same pedestal again, or whether this humiliation, this exposure, this moment of being caught red-handed in a scheme so audacious yet so poorly hidden, will be the indelible stain that defines her legacy, a permanent reminder that in the glitzy world of Hollywood, you can manipulate contracts, you can spin PR, you can even fool fans for a time, but when someone like Justin Baldoni chooses to speak, the truth comes crashing down like a hammer, leaving nothing but the rubble of illusions and the unforgettable image of a star once untouchable now humiliated before the entire world. Subscribe my channel Corevanta for more updates daily. We says to sorry because we did not upload yesterday. Thanks or watching. Subscribe my channel. Thanks. Subscribe my channel Corevanta for more updates daily. We says to sorry because we did not upload yesterday. Thanks or watching. Subscribe my channel. Thanks.